What's up, Gator Nation? Welcome to the Geo Recruiting Show. Zach Albaverti here with Keith Niebuhr and Corey Bender to discuss the latest on Florida football recruiting. A major target put out his decision date this week, so we will get an early preview on that decision. Also talk some more Florida recruiting, what we like about the 2025 class at this point, and our concerns as we get ready to wrap up the final month of the summer. We'll start with the big news this week, guys. Probably the top overall target on Florida's board, Vernell Brown III, put out his decision date, July 21st. He is going to be announcing with On 3. What do you guys think about that recruitment right now? And obviously, Vernell kind of coming to the finish line.
Yeah, no, I think right now, it was just recruitment. It's been kind of the same group of schools that have been mentioned from the start. And I think, obviously, when it pertains to Florida, it's a kid, obviously, they've circled on, for a long time now. And, yeah, he's a legacy kid. You obviously have to point to that because, all the connections he has with his dad, his grandfather. But this is a kid who's earned it on the field as well. A big-time talent who had over 1,300 receiving yards a season ago. So I think right now, obviously, we're almost near the finish line. I still like where Florida stands. Obviously anything can kind of happen recruiting, especially this day and age with NIL. And honestly, Ohio State, Miami, and Florida State, they've always won their share of battles too. But as of right now, I think, like you said, Zach, if Florida can somehow get him on board, he could be that signature piece in the class that they need right now to kind of get some more momentum.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to think Florida is in a strong spot, but this is recruiting in 2024, right? So even when you feel good about people, now he's 2025 class, but this is the year 2024. Even when you feel good about people, how good can you ever really feel? And I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm not trying to be negative. But this is recruiting in 2024. And so young men like Vernell are looking at various aspects. It's not just about where my family played and where I'll fit in. It's where I can fit in off the field. It's where I can best monetize my situation. And so there's a lot to think about and a lot to process. And Zach, I didn't know if you wanted me to talk about this part now, but if you were going to say who are the biggest threats, well, obviously Ohio State's wide receiver U. FSU is coming off a strong season. And after a slow recruiting start, they've really put it together lately. You got to give them credit. You hate to do that, but you got to give them credit, right? And then there's Miami, and that is such an intriguing program to watch because you're talking about also they have a top 10 class right now. They did not have a great team last season or a great record, but the people behind the scenes are making sure Mario Cristobal has a strong roster. That's obvious. Okay, look, they're going all across the country to get guys. Their NIL apparently is very, very strong. So if you're going to say who do you worry about? Who's number two? I don't know who number two is. I don't know who number two is. Corey might know. Zach, you might know. But the school that I'd be most worried about is Miami, because it wasn't that long ago where everybody in Florida thought they were going to land 4-star safety Hilton Stubbs. And there's been multiple kids where you thought Florida's in really strong shape. And then next thing you know, Miami's heavily in the picture. And so to me, that would be your biggest concern. In state, he's in Orlando. Obviously he's from Gainesville, but he's at Orlando Jones. One of his former teammates, Corey, you would remember I think it was a big defensive lineman, edge guy, ended up down at Miami. And then also Vernell Brown's family has ties to Gainesville High, obviously, right? Good Gators school. But guess what? It's also been a good Miami school. And Miami historically has done pretty well with kids from Gainesville. I think of Lamar Thomas. I think of Fred Marion.
Clinton Portis,
Gainesville High guy. So, you start adding it up. And look, I'm not trying to throw fear in anybody. Look, I've got to pick in for Florida, okay? But which team would you watch? To me, it would be Miami. But as a player, look, and Corey and I have been writing about this guy, Zach, since he was a young dude, right? And I remember going out to his school when he was, I guess, just a sophomore, which isn't that long ago, a year and a half ago, to do something on DeAndre Robinson, his teammate who committed to Texas, signed with Texas, and ended up at Florida, who, by the way, Vernell says is loving it at Florida. But I met Vernell, and I'm like, okay, it's Vernell Brown. It's the name. Sometimes these legacy guys aren't, he's good. He's good, and he's smart. I think that's the thing that you really learn most about from talking to him. And I hate to use well-spoken. That kind of has some racial tropes to it, but he is very smart. He is one of the smartest, one of the most intelligent, high IQ off the field, on the field, high school guys at his age I've ever met. And And so he's impressive all the way around. And I think if you can land him, Zach, and I'm going on and on, forgive me, everybody. If you can land him, if you're the Florida Gators, I think he gives you a guy that's a face of the program type, like his dad was. A guy like that, except I think he may be the most talented guy to come through that family. And we should point out that family, Vernell II was very good. Vernell I was a starting DB at Florida in 84, 85, when, by the way, Florida was very good. He's got that great uncle, John L. Brown. He was Florida's leading rusher in 1979 and probably would have been the leading rusher for years after that if Florida hadn't signed a couple first-rounders like James Jones and Lorenzo Hampton. So very good family. And Vernell.
What was the granddad like as a cornerback, Keith?
I mean, I ain't that old. I mean, I remember those teams as a kid, but look, when you think about Florida in 1983, 84, 80, in that range.
SEC champs, baby.
Yes, but not only that, you thought of defense. Okay, you remember Neil Anderson, the great running back who ended up being a Pro Bowler with the Bears. You remember Kerwin Bell. You remember Ray McDonald's dad, Ray McDonald, the receiver. You remember Walter Odom, the tight end. They were great on offense. They were, but they were really great on defense. Okay, Alonzo Johnson, Alonzo Mitz, Clifford Charlton, the linebacker. Just one stud after the other, right? And so he was on the back end of that defense, and they had some very good defensive backs in the 80s, okay? Guys that would, first of all, knock the crap out of you, okay? But specifically, I don't quite – I want to say he was hurt his last year, might have only played half the season. I could be totally wrong, but I happened to look up his stats, Vernell Brown's the first statistics the other day, and it showed him for playing – 6 games this last year. Now, that might have been a mistake from Football Reference, but he had an interception. But that's what Florida was known for, defense in 1984 and 85. They weren't scoring. They had their games where they'd score 38, 40 points, but they weren't averaging 40 points a game. What they did was they stuffed the hell out of the other team's offense, you know?
Yeah, well, another conversation for another day will be whether the
absolutely.
Gators still deserve that 84 title back. But going back to the third, Corey, who do you feel like is the biggest competition for Florida? With Vernell Brown III.
Yeah, I'm with Keith. I don't think anyone really, at least us, have a clear grip on who could be number 2. But one school I think who's been probably the most consistent is probably Florida State. You know, obviously, I think it's one thing to note, Zach, you've mentioned a few times. His sister goes to Florida State, I believe, runs track and field. Obviously, so it's no stranger for someone in that family to go to Tallahassee. So that wouldn't be the first time. But also the relationship. Florida State's been on just like Florida for a few years now. You got Kewan Ratliff, obviously the Gator alum who's in Tallahassee, who's kind of been recruiting him for a little bit on behalf of the Seminoles. Obviously, the whole staff, just like Florida, is involved. So there's kind of that home-like feel up there in Tallahassee. So I think that comfort level, and even just several months ago, you know, at one point, Ohio State and Florida State were mentioned as the leaders over Florida at one point. And just to kind of note, not putting fear in anyone's mind, I do have a pick, just like he said, for Florida. But I think, like in today's stage of recruiting, you can't really rule anyone out. And I agree with Miami. We saw with Kermani McLean, we saw with a lot of different guys at different stages in recruiting, how NIL can kind of just come out of nowhere. It can kind of put a score at the top. I don't think that'll be the case here. I'm still going to go with Florida. But I think for me, Florida State's the one school has probably been the most consistent. He was closer to home, and obviously he has a sister who attends there, so that's obviously no stranger to the family.
Well, and Corey, you mentioned Kewan Ratliff, obviously Gator great and former U.S. staff member. One note about him there is he actually used to be Vernell Brown III's 7-on-7 coach back when they had the Rat Pack. So
yeah,
there's some history there. I've always felt like Florida State was the one to watch for. But we're going to find out here in less than 2 weeks. Before we turn the page on him, what do you feel like is the best and worst case scenario here? If they don't get him, like how bad is that? Where does Florida go at wide receiver? On the flip side, if they land him, what type of momentum could that catapult them into the fall with? Who wants to take it?
Yeah, I'll go. I think best case scenario from a momentum standpoint, I think this is a kid obviously they need in the class. I know wide receiver is a position Florida's probably they're doing fairly well at that position. I feel like with him being a legacy, so if Florida lost on Vernell Brown, I think just from a public standpoint, just a reaction would be pretty bad. I think Florida would say, how do you let this kid get away? Especially if he goes to a school like Florida State. I think losing him is one thing, but if you lose him to an in-state rival, considering all the connections he had to Florida, I just think the reaction would be the noise would be pretty loud. And I just think overall, Florida, there is other targets. I mean, you have Joshua Moore in the class. Nashawn Montgomery is a kid that's trending towards Florida. It's a deep wide receiver class, and Florida would probably still have a good amount of talent coming to Gainesville. But I think losing a kid like this who I believe who could be a 5-star talent. I mean, it's one thing. Over in Orlando Jones, where he plays, man, they play a lot of good competition. He's productive. And just to kind of piggyback on what you guys said earlier, man, as far as being intelligent, he is that kind of captain-like guy who I can see kind of being the face of the program, like Keith noted. So I think overall, if you can get him in the class, I think he could be a lead recruiter for you guys. And I think kind of like how DJ Lagley was, you need those face of the program and face of the class to kind of draw guys. And I think he has that ability.
First of all, I should point out he's a 4-star in the On3 industry rankings right now, which is kind of like takes into consideration 24/7 Sports, Rivals, and ESPN. But he's a 4-star by 1 spot. He's number 33 in the country as we're recording this. The top 32 guys are 5 stars. So he's a 4.99 star is basically how you should consider. And he might be a 5-star by the time he announces his decision. For Florida, obviously it's big. It'd be big to land him. It's a legacy, but he's talented and he also plays an important position. So this year we think, right, Zach, you cover the team. I don't, but we think with Florida having, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, their Wisconsin transfer, Shamir DK.
Yep.
Okay. So with him in the lineup, you can play him as a slot guy. So that allows you to do more things. If I'm reading your stories right, and sometimes I don't read them all the way.
No, you got it right.
The writing just is so boring. No, I'm kidding. But no, y'all do a great job. But it's so if with him there this year, that will allow Eugene Trey Wilson to maybe do other things. But does DK only have 1 season left?
Yeah, this is it. Right? Yeah, this is it with him.
So what you don't want is in 2025 having to put Eugene Wilson back locked in, pigeonholed into that slot position, right? You want to be able to do multiple things with him. So with Vernell Brown, who we think, we think he's college ready-ish, right? Like he should be a guy that can get you 15 to 25 catches.
He'll get on the field as a freshman, yeah.
Yes. And so if you can put him at that, because he's so smart now, you put him at that slot position, and if he produces, that then allows you to the continuity of being able to do various things, multiple things with Eugene Trey Wilson. So to me, it's important there. But to lose him would be catastrophic. I mean, again, we've talked about this. The dad, the granddad, the great uncles, that pipeline, it would make you as a fan, as somebody in the media, as somebody on the staff, question what's wrong. Like why this is a guy, we being them as a program, you have to land, right? You got to land him. If you don't want him, that's one thing, but they apparently do want him and want him bad. All right? So you'd have to kind of question a lot of what's going on. Now, there is one ill to all that, winning. If Florida wins 10 games and they didn't get Vernell Brown, people will be like, it sucks. But won 10 games, man. I mean, it's working.
Good point.
But if you win 6 or 7 games or 8 games, you need people in your corner. And you don't keep them in your corner by losing legacy recruits to your rivals. It's that simple. I mean, this is big boy football, and we're going to talk like big boys here. This is the reality of the situation. It would look awful. It would look awful. The perception would be these guys can't land a legacy whose dad used to work inside the program, whose granddad was part of one great rebuild. And, and it's just, it would be catastrophic. I truly believe that from a perspective standpoint. Now, it wouldn't have anything to do with the on-field this fall. If they win that, like I said, that'd take care of a lot of that. But again, I still feel very good about Florida's positioning, but, you can't lose this guy. And by the way, that actually may work to Florida's advantage, knowing they can't lose him, Zach, and works to Vernell's advantage, knowing that they can't lose him for a variety of reasons, from ability to perception. They're going to do all they can do to get him. And I think that's going to work out in their favor and in his favor. But, it would be bad.
You got to think they're going to be burning the midnight oil here as we approach the finish line. We've obviously covered this recruitment at length at On3, and we're going to keep doing that. So make sure you guys stay locked in. Beyond Vernell Brown III, we had a story at Gators Online about the 3 most important targets for the Gators. Obviously, he being one of them. Let's get into that before we start digging into Florida's class. At this time here on July 10th, as we're recording, more decisions to come. Besides Brown, who do you guys feel like is the most important targets on the board right now for Florida?
Yeah, I'll just start for I'll go with Ben Hanks. I just think right now Florida needs kind of a splash in the secondary, and I think with his recruitment and the ground Florida made up over the summer, I just think right now Florida he's kind of moved up into as far as being more of a realistic target. About 3-4 months ago, Florida was kind of farther down his list. Even when he put out a top group of schools, I believe it was the start of this year, Florida wasn't even on it, and then they kind of jumped back in. That OV is what really kind of changed things as far as where Florida sits with him. It is kind of, and right now, just face it, with DB recruiting too, it's not. I mean, they've lost some key guys. I know Bryce Fitzgerald is a guy on the board who I think Florida's positioned well for. It's going to be close between them and Florida State, but I think right now that's another position Florida really needs to improve on. And having a legacy guy like Hanks, like you said, his dad was on the OV, a lot of nostalgia on that trip. He's one of those guys you can throw out on an island and lock down the number one receiver for an opposing team. And I think obviously the ground you make up, I think now he kind of moves into that category as far as, hey, this is a guy you kind of have to get. I think Miami right now is probably positioned best. I know Georgia obviously feels fairly good too. It's still kind of a fluid recruitment. He's a kid that doesn't do many interviews, kind of keeps people guessing a little bit. But I think right now he definitely is one of the most important guys on the board, especially with where the DB board stands right now.
Yeah, I talked to his dad the other night. So Corey and I are getting a little conflicting info, and that's fine. We're just trying to cover these things from all bases. I talked to his dad the other night, and he basically said they're focused on 4 right now: Florida, Miami, Florida State, and Louisville. And I said, what about Georgia? And he said, well, he kind of hemmed and hawed. Made some calls on that. It sounds like Georgia and him might not work out. And that Florida, that's fine, right? That's fine. But Miami's a real threat there. There's no doubt about that. Miami's got some recruiting momentum right now. And so that's something to be reckoned with. Louisville has some ties to the Hanks family, and Coach Hova, who used to work at Florida, I believe, is at Louisville. And I do know that Ben Hanks and his father really, really respect him and like him as a guy that understands the dynamics of play and the personalities of Florida kids and the dynamics down in Miami. So I think that's keeping Louisville in there. But it seems like it's going to come down for Ben Hanks Jr., Florida and Miami, and we'll see. Now, the dad told me they're going to have a decision before that first game. Now, again, if you're Florida, you're like, oh, no, come to the game before you do anything. But, the reality of it is, even when a kid commits now, it's not over. Corey and I have talked about this. We always say, hey, somebody's off the board. They're not really off. Not anymore. I mean, if you like a kid, you're going to keep recruiting him. And so, we'll see. Even within this recruitment, I've heard different things. At one point, I heard the Florida NIL people, a side of it felt fairly decent. They'd made some real progress. From the coaching side, they felt the same thing. And then I guess about a week ago, I was told that maybe it wasn't trending as well in Florida as they thought internally. So, I don't know. It seems to be doing a little bit of this. So you have to kind of stay the course on these things. If Florida's in it, we know that. We don't know if he's going to visit that last week of July when kids can get back on campus. That's to be determined. But I don't know that would really impact things any more at this point. The kid is nearing a decision. It's going to come in August, according to his dad. We just don't have a date yet. I'd probably give, I know nobody wants to hear this, just kind of gut feeling says maybe a little bit of a Miami edge right now. But he's the main guy. Miles Johnson, linebacker who was committed to Alabama. They got to get a linebacker committed. Safety, you've got guys like Bryce Fitzgerald, Lagonza Hayward. They're going to be announcing fairly soon here. Florida's in the conversation with both, but I wouldn't necessarily say they lead for either one. And then offensive line, I'd love to give you a name. I don't really have any, but any top offensive line prospect to me would be number one. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done in this class. They faced an uphill battle. They didn't play that great last season. The perception is they need to win. Kids want to know that this staff is going to be around, and it's really put them up against the wall a little bit. And obviously they've got, a class that isn't even in the top 50 right now. So there's still so much work to be done. The good news is it's a long cycle. And with NIL, you can make leaps and bounds. You can grow leaps and bounds in the kids' recruitment very quickly. But
yeah,
there's a lot of must-wants. But like Corey, I would agree with Corey. Ben Hanks, obviously, that's another legacy. You don't want to lose those guys. It just doesn't have a great feel to it when you do, if you want him.
No doubt. Now, we've talked about targets so far on this show. Let's talk about the guys in Florida's class. The Gators currently have 8 verbal commitments for 2025. That's the fewest in the SEC. Their class is ranked 15th in the On3 rankings. But there are some nice pieces that they have committed and some guys that this staff is really high on. And there are the concerns as well, which we'll get to. Right now, on the positive note, what do you guys like most about this class and where it stands, and any guys specifically in it? Corey, you can take that one.
Ooh, you guys see me? I think, did I lag out or am I good?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, I'm good. Yeah, no, I think Jalen Wiggins, I think overall it's not a deep position group, but I think at the edge position, I think they need work as far as having depth at that position. But I think keeping Jalen Wiggins in the class for now is obviously a huge thing for Florida. He's a top 100 national talent. A kid that, obviously Florida State wants to keep home. He OV'd there in the summer, took a few other unofficials too. Highly intelligent kid, man. Stanford was in the mix as well. So I think keeping him in the class, I think obviously being the leader in the class is really big at this time, especially with where Florida's class is. I kind of think him shutting it down kind of gives a good impression of the other kids in the class and made some other kids looking at Florida. So I thought that was really key. And I'll touch on tight end as well, man. I'm a real big fan of Tayshaun Gelsey. I think he could be a real good player for Florida. I think that tight end class is kind of underrated to a certain degree. I think Gelsey is kind of good where he's at as a 4-star prospect. And I think Micah Jones is another kid who's more well-rounded, but another kid with some nice upside at tight end. So it's early, and I know they're not both 4-stars, but I think right now with your Russ Callaway, you have to feel good with the tight end class you have too. I think one of the better ones you could probably say in the SEC.
Yeah, I love Josh Moore, man. I mean, I just think this guy's special. 6'4", 210 pounds. He's probably going to be 6'4", 220 pounds in a year. He's got a lot of abilities. He's still raw. He's still untapped, a lot of untapped potential, but that big body that can also run, right? And Tayshaun Gelsey gives you that at the tight end / athlete type role. But Josh Moore, not only is he an elite talent, we have him ranked higher on 3 than anybody else. We got him as a top 75 national recruit, I think like number 58 or 59 overall in the country. And I think by the end of the year, other sites are going to bump him up as well. He's been incredibly productive at West Broward High School down in Pembroke Pines for Coach McCartney. He 850 plus yards last year receiving, over 1,000 receiving yards the year before. But he gives you that dynamic of having that big receiver. And so you're not just running a bunch of slot guys out there. We know Billy Gonzalez has utilized the heck out of those big receivers historically. So I think he's a special talent in that way. And then also, it helps with your footprint down in South Florida. Like, that's a big name guy down there. That's the kind of guy that if you can go out there and put a good product on the field this fall, other kids in South Florida are going to take notice and say, well, maybe I need to take a closer look at Florida. They're doing better on the field. Josh Moore is one of the best players down here. He's going there. Let me figure out why he's going there. I want to do my own research and all that. And so I think it's a win for a lot of different reasons, but I think he's kind of a really high end talent, to be honest with you. Like, I don't know that he's got now he's not DK Metcalf in terms of the speed, but he could have that type of frame and, with the muscles and all that, and the height and all that. And so I just love that pickup. That's my favorite one.
Good stuff. And obviously too, he's a guy that we talked about, Keith. This recruiting doesn't end. Miami's going to keep coming after him. But On3 does have him as a top 100 prospect, and I think maybe top 70. So On3 is very high on Josh Moore. Now, the bad news, or the concern, should we say, we've alluded to some of it, but right now, as we head into the thick of July and some of these decisions coming up, what's the biggest concern that you guys have with this class right now? Keith, we'll let you start.
Yeah, when you look at the board of each individual position, there's only a few that are filled out and you feel really good about. There's a lot of work to be done at quarterback. They're going to bring in some kids, at least one, to maybe throw in late July. So there's a lot of work to be done there. The offensive line board, it's hard to come up with 2 or 3 guys that you say they're in a legitimate position to land. They're going to circle back on some guys, continue to recruit guys already committed to other schools. A lot of work to be done on the defensive line. You got one guy committed, Jarquez Carter of Newberry, right down the road. He's getting ready to announce mid-June, but he's trending elsewhere. So there's not too many guys that you feel good about there. Linebacker, you feel good about their position with Miles Johnson, but other than that, they're just in it with some guys. Cornerback, if you don't get Ben Hanks, where do you turn? Safety, if you strike out with Bryce Fitzgerald or Lagonza Hayward, where do you turn? So yes, there's a lot of concern, and it is not restricted to one position. It's quite frankly all but about two. So the next few weeks are going to be crucial. Who can they get on campus that last week of July? And then it's all about working to see who can get to the games. And I think there's going to be a lot of new names emerging. But again, they're going to continue to do two things at once. They're going to keep recruiting guys like Hilton Stubbs, who committed to Miami, who's now on his second commitment. So you're going to keep working on him. So that wheel's spinning. But you're also going to be working on this wheel, which are some new names. And so there's so much uncertainty right now. Now, with 8 commits, it doesn't sound like a lot, and it's not. But you're not signing 25 to 30. All right. No. You're signing 18 to 20 in that range. And then the rest go to portal. So if you think about it that way, it might help you step back from a ledge if you're a Gator fan. Okay. Because if you land Vernell Brown, that's 9. If you land Miles Johnson, that's 10. Well, then all of a sudden you're talking about only needing 7 or 8 more. Okay. And
yeah.
I mean, you're trying to find bright spots here. And that's one. But if you had to sign 25 still, like, just a few years ago, you'd be like, oh my God, where are they going to come from?
Yeah.
I mean, yes, there's going to be diamonds in the rough emerge, but you don't want too many diamonds in the rough in your class, because to have a bunch, you have to then assume that your staff is smarter than every other staff in the country. I'm not willing to take that leap.
Especially coming off. Yeah. The last 2 classes, they've had they were stacked with 4 stars.
Sure. And by the way, I should point out, that's not a knock on the staff. These are good evaluators, I'm sure, but you can outsmart the Kirby Smarts of the world on 1 or 2 guys, but not on 11 guys. Okay. They got good people working at those schools too. But so I think if you look at it that way, the Vernell Brown gets you to the halfway point, if you can get him, let's say. And then you keep chipping away on some guys. And then we talked to some guys that said, yes, if they win this fall, there are some guys, Malik Autry, the Auburn commit, Jarquez Carter, if he doesn't commit to Florida in July, that's a guy they'll keep chipping away at. And then if you put a good product on the field, he could end up in the class. So all isn't lost, but when you look at the individual boards, it can be a little bit, it's like a little bit of a gut punch, I would assume, Corey, to a lot of the fans.
Corey, what biggest concerns do you have?
Yeah, I think overall, I think the DB board as a whole, because I think obviously Ben Hanks, I'm kind of leaning towards Miami with him. Obviously Hilton Stubbs, they lost him twice. Now first USC, now to Miami. And then when you look at that safety board, Lagonza Hayward, Tennessee has kind of picked up momentum. They were leading for a while. They kind of gained some more momentum down the stretch. I thought with his recruitment, it was kind of be a week-to-week basis off the official visits. Florida made a big impression and kind of surged into the top 2. But they're kind of on the schedule early, so I don't like Florida for him right now. And then Bryce Fitzgerald right now, man, Florida and Florida State. But if someone told me, hey, make your prediction today, I'd probably roll with the Seminoles. So you kind of put that all together. It's tough, man. That's why I kind of put Ben Hanks and Bryce Fitzgerald both as 2 of the most important guys on the board right now, man. And just a note, too, Caleb Singleton, who committed to Rutgers, he was a longtime target over at Fleming Allen. I reconnected with him a few days ago, and he said he hasn't spoken to anyone with the staff since he committed to Rutgers in mid-June. And that was a kid, even when we go up to Gainesville, we interview kids. Will Harris, other staff members will always be with them. We knew there's a kid they wanted in the class. They tried to get him to commit. So, and it's interesting, Rutgers, top 20 class right now, I think 28 commits. Complete opposite. I don't think anyone would ever expect that compared to where Florida is right now. So it'll be interesting. Maybe Florida can circle back on him if they have a few misses. But I think right now, for me, it's a DB board and then O-line. Keith already touched on it, but I think O-line, they did sign a lot of guys the last 2 cycles, so it's not as much of a need. But you still need to bring in some quality names every year to kind of bring in that depth. Maybe portal's going to be a bigger plan of emphasis for them going forward. But other than Tavares Dice, who's I think right now leaning towards sticking with Auburn, it's a very thin board, and I think Florida might have to extend some more offers.
Yeah, if I can make a couple points here, if they lean more into the portal, well, that's a little bit of a deviation from their master build plan too, right? So that would be a little bit of a concern. But I think the other thing to think about here is August is really about coaching. Like June is about recruiting. May is about recruiting. But August, when practice starts, the focus of the staff really turns toward coaching. So it'll be more of the behind-the-scenes people that are doing the bulk of the recruiting. And that's really why you want to have more of your class completed at this time going into fall camp, because you don't need Gerald Chapman on the phone an hour a day calling recruits in August when he's going to be drained. Okay. He's going to be physically drained. Now they're out there getting recharged these couple weeks in July, but that's where the focus should be. But So that's something to keep an eye on. Also, one other thing, Florida could have 20 commitments right now if they want. I mean, Keon Young, safety out of Lakeland, he wanted to commit. They weren't ready. There's other people. They're being selective. Okay. Now, you could argue that maybe they're being too selective given the amount of commitments they have, but they're being selective. A lot of kids that are maybe a little bit down the board, you can circle back to later. Okay. So it's not like they're whiffing on a bunch of 3-star guys out there that don't have any other options. The guys they've been missing on are high, for the most part, big-time prospects, and that doesn't ease the pain anymore. But people need to know that, look, if they wanted to have 20 commitments, they could. Okay?
Yeah, they're swinging for the fences.
Yes. Now, the question is that Florida logo on the shirt, does it allow you to swing for the fences like you could a few years ago? It's funny, whenever a school like Florida hires new assistants, boy, they're always super amped up on Twitter and they're going to do this. And it just, I think some of those guys are finding out like it's a little harder than just that. It's the logo just alone isn't enough anymore. But it's, they're swinging for the fences. They're going to be okay. But the question is, do you want them to be okay or do you want the class to be great? It's going to take a lot for this class to be great. Let's just be totally honest. It doesn't mean it can't happen. Strong season, NIL, buzz, firings at other schools, right? Yeah. A young player emerges at your position at Alabama and you say, well, I ain't going there anymore. That guy's going to be starting for the next 2-3 years. So there's a lot of unknown variables, right? You never count out Florida, but let's not pretend like there isn't a ton of work for these guys left to do, and gals, I should say, ladies and gentlemen, excuse me.
No doubt. Yeah, the Army's hard at work, and this is obviously some time that they get a chance to relax as a staff. A lot of different staff members are on break, and then they will come back. SEC Media Days is next week. They'll have their Grill in the Ville event, and then before you know it, fall camp will be starting up. So still a busy time as it relates to Florida athletics and the Florida football program specifically. More decisions coming up. So if you guys aren't subscribed to Gators Online, make sure that you take advantage of our promo code that is only for listeners of the Geo Recruiting Show and the Gators Online Show. You go to sign up, put in the code UF1. You'll get 2 months of premium access for just $1. So you'll get all the intel on these decisions before they happen. You'll get all the intel out of fall training camp and everything leading up to the 2024 season. So make sure that you guys take advantage of that. Corey and Keith, thanks again for another episode, fellas. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Geo Recruiting Show ahead of the decision for Vernell Brown III, July 21st on 3. So looking forward to that. For Keith Niebuhr and Corey Bender, I'm Zach Albaverdi. We'll see you guys next week.